There are words a man speaks not with his lips, but with his soul, words shaped by still mornings, quiet reflection, and the courage to be truly seen. When a man loves an older woman, he does not shout his love to the world, he whispers it in 13 sacred ways that only someone listening with their heart can truly hear. This is not just about love. It is about what love becomes when it grows beyond the surface, when it begins to walk beside wisdom, maturity, and grace. If you stay with this message until the end, you may begin to recognize those words, not just in others, but in your own life. And perhaps you'll be left with a deeper question. What do the words I speak say about the depth of my own love and the peace within me? There is a moment in every man's life when the fire of ambition begins to give way to the glow of awareness. It is in that gentle turning, when striving begins to soften, that he may look upon a woman who carries the wisdom of seasons, and not only feel attraction but reverence. A woman who has lived, who has lost and grown, who has found her stillness in a world that rarely pauses. She is no longer just seen. She is as understood, and it is only then that a man learns to speak the language of depth. When a man falls in love with an older woman, he is not pulled by the surface, he is drawn into the current beneath. He is not racing towards something fleeting, stepping into something enduring. He begins to utter words that have weight, shaped by time and thought. The first of these is not elaborate. It is simple, but it holds the power of silence behind it. I see you. To say, I see you in this way is not to glance. It is to gaze without judgment. It is to see through the years, through the defenses, through the polished mask, and to meet the quiet soul behind the eyes. This seeing is not just about vision. It is about a presency. It is the kind of seeing that requires stillness within. Only when the waves of the mind grow still can the reflection in the water become clear. There is a story of an old monk who lived at the edge of a misty mountain. One evening, a young warrior came to him, frustrated and restless, seeking wisdom on how to win the love of someone who seemed unreachable. A woman older than he, full of grace and mystery. The monk said nothing at first. He simply pointed to the valley below where a crane stood still in the river, unmoving. Watch her, the monk whispered. For hours the warrior watched as the crane did nothing, did not fly, did not hunt, did not sing. And yet, as the sun fell and the moon rose, the crane slowly lifted her head, walked across the water, and stood beside a second crane who had arrived unnoticed. The monk finally spoke. It is not how loud you cry that brings another closer. It is how deeply you are still enough to be known. To truly see someone, especially a woman shaped by time, a man must quiet his ego. He must set aside the need to impress, to conquer, or to compare. He must look into her being, past the external markers, and recognize the invisible. Her resilience, her kindness sharpened by loss, her strength carved from solitude. This is a gaze that says, I do not need you to be younger, brighter, or different. I only need you to be as you are. In daily life, this kind of seeing is often missed. In a world of swipes and scrolls, appearances are mistaken for essence. But when a man slows down, when he watches how she makes tea with care, how she listens without the need to reply, how she moves through her day rooted and unshaken, he begins to witness something sacred. He sees the wholeness of her. It is like observing the forest after the rain. At first glance, it is just trees and mist, but when you are still enough, you begin to hear the soft breath of the earth, smell the richness of the soil, and notice how every droplet clings to a leaf in reverence. So it is with a woman who has journeyed inward. Her beauty is not in bloom but in being. As the Persian mystic Hafiz once wrote, the small man builds cages for everyone he knows. while the sage who has to duck his head when the moon is low keeps dropping keys all night long for the beautiful, rowdy prisoners. To see someone truly is to drop the keys, to liberate, not possess. From this place of seeing, a new word arises. A softer word, almost whispered, not because it lacks force, because it does not need volume to carry truth. You calm me. This is not the calm of distraction, nor the silence of repression. It is the deep exhale of a soul that has been racing for too long. To say, you calm me, is to say, as in your presence, I remember who I am beneath the noise. There is a parable of a young man who wandered into a temple high in the mountains. He was exhausted from chasing the approval of the world, from endless doing, seeking, proving. Temple was empty except for an old woman sweeping the stone floor with quiet devotion. He asked her, "How do I quiet the storms in my mind?" She looked at him kindly and said, "Stop chasing the wind. Sit and let the wind pass through you." The older woman represents more than age. She represents clarity, the kind that cannot be purchased or performed. Her calm is not emptiness, it is earned peace. When a man loves such a woman, he begins to experience her not as an escape, but as an anchor. She reminds him of the rhythm of breath, the wisdom of waiting, the gentleness of a presence that asks for nothing, but gives everything. In personal life, such moments arrive in subtle ways. He may be burdened by failure, tense from the demands of his world. And she, without fanfare, simply places a hand on his shoulder, offers a knowing smile, or says nothing at all. In that silence, his spine relaxes, his thoughts slow, and he remembers the quiet joy of just a being. Nature teaches this as well. A mountain does not call out to the sky to be noticed. It simply stands. It holds the valley. It receives the snow and the sun alike. The wind may howl and the rains may flood, but the mountain remains steady, undisturbed, generous in its stillness. In her, he finds this mountain. And this calm is not just for his benefit. It is also a reflection of his growth. To be calmed by another requires trust. It means he no longer craves adrenaline, chaos, or conquest. It means he has begun to taste the sweetness of inner alignment. Her presence calls forth the better man in him, not by demanding it, but by inspiring it through grace. As the Taoist philosopher Zhuangzi once observed, flow with whatever may happen, and let your mind be free. Stay centered by accepting whatever you are doing. This is the ultimate. In her presence, the man is reminded that love is not movement towards something. It is return, not a climb, but a settling. So the first word, I see you, is the door. It is the moment when vision becomes wisdom. The second, you calm me, is the breath, the stillness that follows, the space where love can grow not in haste, but in harmony. Together form the beginning of a sacred path. A path not of fireworks, but of lanterns lit along the way. A journey not to capture love, to become worthy of it. For when a man begins to speak like this, gently, slowly, from the depth of his being, it is not because he learned the words. It is because he became the stillness from which such words arise. And in this stillness, something ancient awakens. Not just in him, but in the woman he loves. Because to be seen and calmed by someone who honors your soul is to remember who you've always been beneath the noise of the world. So let us walk softly. Let us speak only when the words carry water, not smoke. Let us love not for what we gain, for what we become in the quiet presence of each other. And perhaps then, as the mist lifts and the breath slows, we will see what was always waiting behind the veil. The kind of love that does not need to shout, because it has already been heard. There are truths that only time can teach a heart. In the quiet passage of years, what once seemed urgent becomes unnecessary. What once burned bright and loud eventually gives way to something deeper, steadier. like the glow of a lantern in the fog. When a man begins to love not for possession, but for connection, not to fulfill his image, but to understand another's essence, the words he speaks begin to shift. They no longer seek to prove, but to reflect. This is the essence of his transformation when he loves a woman who has lived longer, felt deeper, and listened more than most. Third, truth he speaks is born not from pride, but from peace. He no longer seeks to impress through volume or show. Instead, he begins to speak gently, choosing his words like seeds planted in quiet earth. And so he says, "Time has softened my ego." To understand this is to understand the journey from outer strength to inner strength. In youth, the ego builds walls. It sharpens the tongue, competes for space, and demands attention. But as time moves through the soul like water through stone, those sharp edges begin to wear down. What remains is not smaller, but more whole. When a man truly loves, and especially when he loves a woman who does not require his performance, he finds the courage to lay down the armor. He learns that strength is not in resisting, but in ever releasing. A parable speaks of this change. A warrior came to a monk, troubled by the fear of losing his pride. "If I surrender my ego," he asked, "what will I have left?" The monk poured tea into the warrior's cup until it overflowed. "You came here full," he said, "ask to be filled. You must empty the vessel if you wish to taste peace." And so the warrior, puzzled yet moved, placed his sword at the foot of the altar, not to lose his power, but to rediscover its purpose. When a man speaks to an older woman from a place where his ego has softened, his language changes. He no longer interrupts to dominate the conversation. He no longer offers solutions when she seeks only presence. He listens. He considers. He speaks not to win, but to meet her where she is. This is mirrored in nature. Watch the river. In its early course, it rushes, noisy, wild, carving its way with force. But as it travels further, it slows. It deepens. It begins to curve gently through the valley, nourishing the land in silence. So too does a man become more himself, not by speeding up, but by slowing down. In daily life, you may see this in how he responds. A moment of disagreement no longer ignites defensiveness. Instead, it opens space. He asks, "Is there truth here I haven't seen?" And this question is not weakness, it is maturity. A woman who has seen much in her years will feel the difference. She will recognize the man not trying to conquer her, but one willing to walk beside her in humility and grace. As the philosopher Seneca once offered, it is the power of the mind to be unconquerable. The man who conquers his own ego no longer fears being wrong, nor fears the silence that comes after truth is spoken. He knows that silence too can be an offering. From this softened state, something more begins to emerge, a recognition that love does not measure time by age, but by depth. He begins to speak with his spirit, not his status. And so he says, the soul hears beyond years. This truth is not taught in schools or written in books. It is felt. It arises in the quiet connection between two people who no longer need to be anything other than what they are. When a man loves an older woman, he does not count the years between them. He honors the lifetimes within her. He sees not a difference, but a depth. There is a tale from the mountains of the East. A young traveler, wearied by heartbreak, met a blind poet sitting by the river. "Why do I only fall in love with women older than me?" he asked. The poet smiled and replied, "Because your heart does not seek to be dazzled, it seeks to be understood." The traveler paused and, in that moment, saw the river as he had never seen it, not for its movement, but for its message. Age had never mattered. Depth had always been the compass. In this love, the man begins to hear not just what is said, but what is meant. The pauses between her words are not empty. They are filled with knowing. Her stories are not just events, they are teachings, each carrying the breath of time. To love her is to sit at the edge of a vast lake and know that beneath its surface lies a world he may never fully reach, but one he bows to nonetheless. In his own soul, this awakens a sacred silence. He does not try to define her or decor her. He witnesses her, and in doing so, he begins to hear his own deeper voice, the one that had been hidden under noise and expectation. This is the gift of loving someone who has stopped performing. You stop performing too. Cherry tree does not blossom earlier because the others have bloomed. It waits for its time. And when it does, it blooms not for the eye, but because that is its nature. So too does this woman live from her essence, not for attention. And so too does he begin to bloom in her presence, gently, honestly, without rush, in the ordinary rhythms of life. This love is felt in the smallest gestures. She may reach for his hand without speaking. He may place a cup of tea before her without being asked. No explanation needed. The soul speaks, the soul hears. And in this, the illusion of separation fades. To see someone's soul is to no longer measure love in years, but in as moments of presence, in how deeply you breathe together, in how long you can sit without the need to fill the air. This is the rare intimacy that time does not threaten. It protects. The Buddha once said, do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. In such love, present becomes sacred. It becomes enough. From the ego softening to the soul's listening, the journey continues. A man who speaks these words does so not to charm, but to cherish, and in doing so, he becomes a rare presence. A man not afraid of depth, not distracted by difference, but drawn to the quiet fire of truth. This path is not loud, it is not urgent. It moves like the wind through tall grass, barely noticed, yet it changes everything it touches. The man who walks this path begins to live from the inside out. He becomes still. He becomes aware. And in this stillness, the words he once grasped for now arise naturally. I no longer need to be more, he says, because I now see that love was never about being more, only about being fully. Here, let these words linger like the mist at dawn. Let them settle in the spaces where we once rushed to fill silence with sound. And perhaps in that stillness, we too may hear something deeper, something beyond time, beyond pride, beyond fear. For the soul does not count years. It only counts awakenings. When a man truly begins to love, not for possession or praise, but from the depth of being, he begins to understand something rare and vital, that love is not a display of strength, but a practice of vulnerability. This understanding does not arrive in a moment of triumph, but in silence, often after life has humbled the heart and softened the voice. The fifth truth he speaks when loving a woman who has walked many paths before him is not boastful. It is a quiet surrender. I can be vulnerable with you. To the world, vulnerability may seem like a fracture, a crack in the armor, but in the realm of love, it is the opening through which light enters. A man raised in the noise of competition and the culture of concealment may have learned to hide his sorrow, to sheath his fears, to mask confusion with confidence. But the presence of a woman who has learned not to run from pain, who holds her wounds like lanterns, teaches him something the world never could, that to be seen in his rawest truth is not a risk, but a liberation. There is an old story of a wandering monk who carried a delicate porcelain bowl wrapped in silk. Each day, he removed the silk to observe the bowl's beauty and then gently wrapped it again. One day, the bowl cracked when a child bumped into him. Rather than discard it, the monk took it to a quiet village where an old potter lived. Potter did not repair it with glue, but filled the cracks with molten gold. The monk looked upon it and whispered, Now it holds more than before. It holds the story of its breaking. So it is with the human heart. When a man opens the parts of himself that tremble, the fear of not being enough, the ache of regret, the silence that sometimes follows loss, he does not become lesser. He becomes truer. In the presence of a woman who understands that brokenness is not shameful but sacred, his vulnerability becomes a bond, not a burden. In daily life, vulnerability is not a grand confession. It is the moment he says, I don't have the answer. It is in admitting when he is tired, overwhelmed, or uncertain, and trusting that she will not turn away but move closer. It is in letting the tears fall without apology, knowing they will not be used against him, gathered like rain into the soil of trust. Nature shows us this as well. The strongest trees are not those untouched by wind, but those that bend. The bamboo survives not because it resists, but because it yields. And the rivers that carve valleys do so not through force, through persistent softness. Vulnerability is not the absence of strength. It is its source. For a man who can reveal his heart without needing to be rescued is a man who has come home to himself. The philosopher Lao Tzu once said, "Of he who knows others is wise. He who knows himself is enlightened." But it is not enough to know oneself. One must be willing to be seen. When a man says, "I can be vulnerable with you," he is not merely speaking words. He is offering the key to his inner chamber. And this offering is a rare and sacred thing. From here, the sixth truth arises not as a continuation, but as a consequence. After vulnerability is welcomed, something deeper grows, a stillness. The man who has shown his heart and found it held with care no longer needs to speak all the time. He no longer fears silence. In this silence, something precious blooms. And so he says, still waters reflect the deepest truths. This is not a metaphor, it is a lived experience. The noise of daily life, running through the park, the urgency of decisions, the performance of identity, all of these stir the surface of the mind. But when two souls sit together without needing to fill the space, when they can share silence without discomfort, it is there that the most honest reflection takes place. Is a tale told in the highlands of a solitary lake hidden from view. Many had passed near it, but only a few had found it. It was said that those who did and looked into its waters could see not only their face, their truth. One day, a young man found the lake and peered into it. At first, he saw nothing but clouds and sky. He stirred the water with his hand, but the image blurred. A voice from the wind whispered, "Be still, and you will see." He waited. The water calmed. And slowly, not just his face, but his longings, fears, and truths began to appear. He wept not out of sorrow, but recognition. In stillness, the lake had revealed what noise had hidden. So it is in love. The man who can sit beside a woman and say nothing, yet feel everything, has entered the sacred terrain of intimacy. The woman who does not demand constant reassurance, but offers presence, becomes the mirror through which he sees his essence. This stillness is rare. It cannot be forced, only allowed. It arises after vulnerability, after ego has softened, after performance has been set aside, and in this quiet space, the soul speaks. Words lose their urgency because nothing needs to be proven. The breath slows, the shoulders drop, and suddenly the heart feels known. In personal growth, this kind of stillness often follows a long journey. After striving, after chasing, after trying to become someone in the eyes of others, a man sits down beside someone who sees him as he is, not as he projects. In her gaze, he rests. In her silence, he listens to himself. And in nature, the lesson repeats. A pond untouched by wind becomes a mirror. A night without noise allows the stars to whisper. The quiet grove where no footstep echoes becomes the place where truth walks barefoot. In the same way, a relationship rooted in stillness becomes the ground where trust grows deep and steady. As the Japanese Zen master Dito-gen once wrote, "Do not follow the ideas of others, but learn to listen to the voice within yourself. Your body and mind will become clear and you will realize the unity of all things." This clarity is not the result of striving, but of stilling. And in this stillness, a man does not lose himself, he returns to himself. From vulnerability to stillness, the journey is not linear. It is circular, like the breath. You open and you quiet. You reveal and you rest. The older woman, seasoned by time, carries this rhythm within her. She does not demand words. She creates space for truth to rise. She does not fear quiet. She honors it. And so the man, once restless, now still, once guarded, now open, he becomes less like a flame and more like a lantern, soft, steady, illuminating not just the path ahead, but the inner terrain. Let these reflections settle. Let them unfold like petals in the warmth of sunlight. For the heart that dares to open and the soul that learns to sit in silence are not weak. They are wise. And the words that come from such a place, though few, hold the weight of entire lifetimes. May we all speak less and mean more. May we all listen not just to words, but to the silence between them. And may we all learn in time that love does not begin with certainty. It begins with presence. For in vulnerability we are met, and in stillness we are as seen. There comes a moment in the quiet arc of a man's growth when love no longer rushes like fire, but flows like water. In this stillness, he begins to understand a new rhythm, one that does not demand, but allows. And in this allowing, he begins to see that the words which carry the deepest truths are not the loudest, but the most rooted. Among these truths, he begins to realize that affection does not need to arrive dressed in declarations or grandeur. Instead, it comes wrapped in intention, wrapped in patience. That is when he begins to say with quiet certainty of time has softened my ego. When the ego is young, it reaches outward. It seeks to be seen, to be admired, to be right. It defends, it compares, it desires control. In the presence of an older woman, one who has walked long enough to stop chasing approval. The man is met not with judgment, with a kind of still grace. She does not seek to tame his ego. She simply does not engage with it. She leaves space. And in that space, something humbling happens. The ego realizes it is no longer necessary. It is not through force that the ego is softened. It is through seeing clearly and without flattery, where the ego no longer serves. Love that matures becomes less about the need to win or convince and more about the wish to witness. The man begins to observe how peace follows her not because she controls the world around her, but because she no longer fights with it. She speaks without urgency, moves without apology, and offers presence without pretense. And in her presence, he begins to loosen his grip. There is a parable from the southern mountains where a monk once tended to a bell made of bronze. It was his task to polish it daily. For years, he did so with pride, scrubbing it with vigor, ensuring it shone brighter than any other object in the temple. One day, a silent nun arrived and sat beside the bell. She did not polish it. She simply sat. After some time, the monk noticed something strange. Her calmness seemed to make the bell shine on its own. Curious, he asked, "Why do you not polish it?" She replied, "Because stillness leaves no smudges. So too does the ego create the smudges it then tries to clean. A man whose affection is true begins to let go of the need to be dazzling, to be the loudest or the most clever. In loving a woman who has made peace with herself, he begins to make peace with himself as well. And from this peace, a new kind of love is born, one that is quiet, constant, and deeply aware. In daily life, this may be seen in the subtle ways he changes. He no longer feels the need to interrupt when she speaks. He listens not to reply, but to understand. He lets her speak from her experience without challenging it with his own. And when they disagree, he does not defend himself with pride. He breathes, he considers, he responds with care, not competition. This is not the death of masculinity, it is its deepening. The fire becomes a hearth, not a blaze. In the natural world, we see this in the progression of seasons. Spring bursts forth with color and noise. Summer shouts in brightness. But autumn, autumn whispers. It lets go without bitterness. The leaves fall not in defeat, but in surrender. And the trees, stripped of their adornments, remain more themselves than ever. The man who has softened his ego is like the tree in autumn. Nothing is lost. Everything unnecessary is released. The philosopher Chuang Tzu once said, "Flow with whatever is happening and let your mind be free." Stay centered by accepting whatever you are doing. This is the ultimate test. A man who has let time soften his ego does not seek to be right all the time. He seeks to be real. And in doing so, he becomes not smaller, but more grounded. From here, the path leads naturally towards something even more profound. Once the ego has softened, the man begins to see beyond the surface of things. He begins to see that love, too, is not bound by age, appearance, or the story the world tells. It is the meeting of two souls who remember each other in silence. And so, with reverence in his voice, he begins to say, "The soul hears beyond years." This is not a poetic phrase. It is a spiritual truth. The body moves through time, but the soul does not age. It deepens. And when a man loves a woman who has seen more winters than he learns that what he loves is not merely her form or her face. It is her being. It is the way she carries grief without bitterness, the way she delights in small things without hunger. It is the rhythm of her breath when she sleeps peacefully beside him. The soul is not loud. It is not youthful or aged. It is timeless. There is a story from an old monastery nestled beside a river where two willow trees grew. One tall and young, the other shorter, weathered, and scarred from lightning. A young monk asked the teacher, "Which tree is more beautiful?" The teacher replied, "Ask the wind." The next day, the wind came and danced more gently through the older tree, bending with its rhythm, whispering through its cracks. The monk said, "I hear a song in the old tree I could not hear in the young." The teacher smiled. "That is because your soul is beginning to listen." In the presence of a mature woman, the man begins to feel heard not in his opinions, in his pauses. She does not rush to fill silences or explain his thoughts. She lets him arrive in his own time. And in this spaciousness, he hears himself more clearly than he ever did before. The need to entertain, to impress, to perform, these fade. What remains is a mutual recognition. We are not here to change each other. We are here to remember each other. In daily life, truth reveals itself in the mundane. He may watch her sip her tea slowly, not rushing to finish. He may see her tending to a plant with care, as a task, but as a ritual. And he realizes that this stillness, this presence, carries a depth he has never encountered in haste. He begins to match her pace. He begins to enter her silence not as a stranger, but as someone returning home. In nature, this truth is evident in the relationship between the earth and the sky. The sky offers light, but the earth receives it and transforms it. Flowers do not grow in the light alone. They need the soil, the roots, the hidden nourishment that comes only from depth. In the same way, a man's affection begins to deepen when he learns not just to admire a woman's beauty, but to recognize her soul. The Indian mystic Kabir once said, "Wherever you are is the entry point." The soul does not care for chronology. It listens through presence. It recognizes love not by age or origin, but by attunement. And when two souls meet in that sacred space, they are not counting years. They are counting moments of truth. In this truth, the man finds something he never knew he was seeking. Not a perfect partner, not a younger reflection of himself, but a mirror for his becoming. In her, he sees what he could be: wise, calm, whole. And in loving her, he begins to walk toward that version of himself. Let the listener pause here. Let the breath become steady again. For we are not rushing toward an end. We are sitting beside truths that have waited lifetimes to be heard. These are not just words. They are as signposts, reminders of a path that leads inward and home. When time softens the ego, and the soul begins to hear what the world cannot say, then love becomes not an escape, but a return. A return to presence, a return to truth, a return to the silent fire that has burned in the heart since before the heart had words. And in this return, we remember the deepest love does not need to announce itself. It arrives gently, like snow on an old roof, soft, enduring. True, there are moments in life when silence speaks more truth than words ever could. And in love, particularly in the kind that stretches beyond the need for possession or validation, there emerges a sacred honesty. When a man opens his heart to a woman who has lived long enough to outgrow illusion, his love matures, not by accident, but by courage. He begins to speak not with his bravado, but with his truth. And in this vulnerable awakening, one of the most transformative revelations he shares is, "I'm not afraid to be vulnerable with you." Vulnerability is not weakness, though the world often whispers otherwise. In a culture that rewards performance and detachment, vulnerability is rarely taught. It is discovered. It is the strength to stand unguarded, the bravery to be seen in one's raw, unpolished self. For a man who has been taught to wear armor in public and suppress emotion in private, to say, "I trust you enough to show you my softness," is no small act. It is a return to truth. The woman he says this to is not one who demands this vulnerability, but one who invites it by simply being present. She does not need to fix him. She simply listens. With eyes that have already wept, and with hands that have already held their own trembling. She knows that healing does not always require instruction, only space. And so in her presence, his defenses begin to melt. Not because he is weak, but because he is safe. There is a parable from the eastern mountains. A young apprentice came to a temple carrying a tightly sealed jar. Inside was water he had fetched from a distant spring. Proudly, he presented it to the master, saying, "I've brought pure water, guarded it carefully, and spilled not a drop." The master gently asked, "May I drink from it?" The apprentice tried to open it, but it was sealed too tightly. His fear of spilling had made it impossible to share. The master then replied, "Water that cannot be poured quenches no thirst." In the same way, a man whose heart is sealed by fear, pride, or the memory of past hurt may carry love, but it cannot nourish another until he opens it. Vulnerability is the turning of the jar's lid. It is the unsealing of truth. And when he does so, he finds that the woman before him does not shrink from what is real. She welcomes it, because she too has learned that brokenness is not something to be hidden. It is a doorway to something deeper. In the quiet corners of daily life, this vulnerability often appears not in grand declarations, but in soft admissions. He may say, "I don't know what I'm feeling, but I want to try to say it." He may pause, breath unsteady, and admit when he feels doubt or fear. He may share memories he has never spoken aloud, not for sympathy, but for release. And in these moments, she does not rush to solve or soothe. She simply holds the space, like the earth holds rain, allowing it to seep deep into roots that long for truth. In the natural world, we see this in the movement of animals who have learned trust. A bird that perches on a shoulder, an animal that drinks from an outstretched hand. These are not creatures without fear. They are beings who have discerned the presence of peace. Vulnerability arises not in absence of fear, but in the presence of trust. As the Zen poet Raikan once wrote, "Too lazy to be ambitious, I let the world take care of itself. 10 days worth of rice in my bag, a bundle of twigs by the fireplace. Why talk of fame and fortune? This and nothing else is all I have ever wanted." His vulnerability was not dramatic. It was gentle. It lived in simplicity, in the choice to live without masks. So too does a man become free when he no longer fears being seen. Not as a hero, but as a human. Not as a savior, but as someone still learning how to hold his own heart. And the woman who receives this gift, his openness, does so with reverence. She knows the rarity of such a gesture. She knows that love is not found in the stories we tell others, but in the truths we dare to speak aloud. And when vulnerability becomes a language spoken fluently between them, a deeper silence begins to emerge. Not the silence of absence, the silence of union. They no longer need to fill the air with explanations or effort. Their love begins to settle, not into boredom, but into stillness. And so the next truth begins to rise like mist over a calm lake. Still waters reflect the deepest truth toss. Stillness is not the absence of activity. It is the presence of clarity. It is the place we reach not when everything is done, but when everything unnecessary has been released. In the context of love, ness is the moment when two people can sit beside one another and not need anything. When the gaze between them is enough, when the silence between words is no longer uncomfortable, but sacred. There is a story passed down from an old temple nestled in a forest. A young monk, restless with the desire to become enlightened, approached the master each morning with questions. What should I do today to grow? What should I learn? What should I fix? The master only pointed to a small pond and said, "Go watch the water." For months the monk obeyed, though impatiently. One day, while watching the pond in a quiet dawn, the wind ceased, the surface stilled. And in the stillness, the monk saw his own reflection so clearly it startled him. That day, he returned to the master with no questions. He simply bowed. He had seen what words could not teach. In relationships, we often seek clarity through conversation. But there is a clarity that only stillness can bring. When a man and a woman can rest together, not as lovers proving devotion, but as souls simply being, something ancient stirs. A recognition that all striving is over, that love at its most honest does not need adornment. In daily life, this may appear in the quiet ritual of sitting together after a long day. No words, just shared breath. Or the moment when a song plays softly in the background, and both know that speaking would only disturb the holiness of now. Stillness becomes the space in which truth emerges, not forced, but felt. The natural world knows this well. In the deepest part of the forest, the most life blooms in silence. The trees do not compete for sound. The moss does not shout its presence. Yet, life thrives. The soul, too, thrives in such spaces. It heals not in drama, but in depth, and the depth is reached only when the surface stills. As the poet Matsuo Bash wrote, sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes, and the grass grows by itself. This is the heart of stillness. It is not something we achieve, it is something we allow. And in love, it is the gift we give one another when we stop striving and start listening to the quiet hum beneath all things. When a man says, "Still waters reflect the deepest truths," he is not making a statement. He is offering a presence. He is saying, "With you, I no longer need to perform. I can simply be." And in this being, truth arrives. It does not announce itself with noise. Settles, like a feather in snow. Together, vulnerability and stillness form the sanctuary where real love resides. not the love that flickers with emotion, but the love that endures through awareness. When a man learns to reveal himself without fear and to sit in silence without discomfort, he is no longer chasing love. He is love. Let these truths echo quietly within. Let them ripple through the pond of your mind, slowly, gently. For we are not meant to arrive at wisdom in haste. We are meant to arrive whole. And wholeness is not perfection. It is presence. So may we all find the courage to be open. May we all find the stillness to truly see. And in that seeing, may we discover what has always been waiting, not in the distance, but in the quiet within.